Welcome back to a walk through the tarot. This is card 12, the Hanged Man. It's an unexpected sight, but the Fool can see that he is hanging with grace and doesn't look in pain or uncomfortable, just very strange. In the previous video, the Fool met Justice, the halfway point through the major arcana. He lifted the veil and walked through, and now the path is getting trickier, but he's learned not to jump to conclusions or take what he sees at face value. There's been progress. We're going to look at the background to this card, explore the symbols, and see what messages it might have for the Fool as he continues with his journey. Early tarot showed aspects of life in 15th century Italy, where to be hung upside down by a single foot was a popular punishment for traitors. The Visconti Sforza tarot image of a hanged man may be connected to the practice of shame paintings, which were common in Renaissance Italy. In cases where an accused left town, their image was often drawn on prominent city buildings so all would know of the alleged crimes. Shame was part of a code of honour where the threat of being shamed helped maintain social order. Public disgrace and humiliation were often used as punishment, like putting someone in the stocks and pelting them with rubbish. The method was supported by the church, so it's possible the early hanged man cards reflected this practice. The Visconti Sforza decks showed someone at peace rather than suffering, and some say the image might represent the idea of Christian martyrs who found spiritual strength in suffering. Other cards from this time, like the Charles VI tarot, show the hanged man holding bags which may contain stolen money, but some have linked this image to Judas and say the bags contain the 30 pieces of silver that he took as a reward for his betrayal of Jesus. Other early decks, like the Minciate tarot, dated back to Florence in the early 1500s, and mass-produced texts like the Rosenwald tarot also show this image. As tarot moved across Europe and arrived in France in the 17th century, more details were added to the cards. The Giuseppe Mitelli tarot from the mid-17th century shows a traitor convicted of murder, and his punishment is to be hammered rather than hung. Some of the Marseillais-style decks show feathers to signify a more spiritual aspect to the card, while the Van den Boer tarot, which was an early attempt to see the cards differently, shows the hanged man turned upright. When tarot was adopted by the French occultists in the 18th and 19th centuries, Antoine Court de Gebelin linked the card to the virtue of prudence. He also claimed the man should be right way up rather than upside down to reinforce that he was not a victim of punishment. De Gebelin introduced the concept of divine law, which could be followed or denied, and said the card showed an individual who's reached a turning point in their life. A century later, Eliphas Levi suggested the hanged man represented a voluntary surrender to unseen powers, and the card also symbolised the work of alchemy, which was less about turning base metal to gold and more about the practice of initiation into the work of spiritual transformation. Swiss occultist Oswald Wirth claimed the image represented transcendence. The hanged man had let go of the past and now sees the world differently. From this point forward, his soul is free and he can focus on non-material experiences. Wirth introduced droplets like falling leaves or water to signify divine grace and show the presence of divine power in voluntary sacrifice. The Waite-Coleman-Smith tarot reinforced the occultist concept of a spiritual path to transcendence. Waite saw the card through the lens of Christian mysticism, whereby the universe was a divine creation and the hanged man in a state of trance. Waite added a golden halo and changed the legs so the right rather than the left foot was attached to the gibbet, now portrayed as a living tree. It's another complex card, so let's take a closer look at the symbolism on the Waite-Coleman-Smith design. Tarot is full of symbols, including the meaning attached to colour. The hanged man is wearing red and blue. Red represents the physical body and its passions, as well as being the colour associated with creative energy. Blue symbolises intuition and emotional responses, and the Fool remembers how blue was the dominant colour in the High Priestess card, which had introduced him to the idea of duality between conscious and unconscious existence. The yellow halo signifies a higher consciousness, which is now visible, and it shows spiritual and intellectual enlightenment. It indicates the hanged man is not suffering or being punished, but is in a state of trance through voluntary surrender. Unlike older tarots, the right rather than the left foot is attached, and it's said this shift shows a deliberate spiritual choice rather than punishment. The gibbet is now a living tree with buds and leaves, which demonstrates the potential for inner growth. It's shaped in a letter T. The vertical stands for the divine and the horizontal for the material, so it represents the point where the material path crosses with the physical one. Connections between trees and spirituality are old. The tree has long been a symbol of life, and a tree of life can be found in multiple belief systems. This card as we know it today may have links to the world tree, Yggdrasil, in Norse mythology, where Odin hung upside down for 9 days and nights, undergoing a ritual death to obtain wisdom. The tarot hanged man remains rooted in life. This is no death sentence or punishment, but more of a temporary pause. So let's examine the messages the card might have for our Fool. The hanged man represents acceptance. It's time to let go of thoughts and beliefs which have been preventing progress. Every card the Fool has met so far has been leading him to this moment, and now it's time to take the next step on the long inner journey towards himself. He's on the other side of the veil behind justice, but despite the card appearing bizarre and unexpected, there's a simplicity about the hanging man who appears calm and unbothered by his situation. Somewhere beyond the trials and tribulations of life, he's found inner peace. And this card is telling the Fool he needs to see the world in a different way. So far on his journey, he's been encouraged to look inwards for answers, and this card is no different. But the hanged man still requires action, because it's time for the Fool to let go of what can't be changed. The card signifies acceptance and the instinctive knowledge of how the right choice feels. Rather than being pushed and pulled by external events, it's time to pause and reflect on all that's been learned so far. Our Fool needs to break free from limiting thought patterns and fears in order to accept change. It might be hard, but what seems difficult can also be an opportunity for spiritual growth. And, like all the cards, the hanged man contains dual messages. It can signify stubbornness, a refusal to stop and see things differently, maybe resistance to change, or the stagnation of being stuck in old ways of seeing and being. Change can also involve giving up habits and their comforts, regardless of how much harm they might be causing. We fear life without them, so avoid making the necessary sacrifice. It can also be a warning against wasting energy on something which is going nowhere, or forcing events to happen when the time isn't right. Once the Fool's walk through the tarot has ended, he may return to the people he knew. He'll be excited and want others to discover the journey for themselves, but he'll have to accept it might not be the right time for them. Everyone has their own path to follow, and, so long as it harms none, the Fool must let them continue rather than insist that they follow in his footsteps. This is his journey, not theirs, and once the Fool experiences the hanged man's inner peace, it will give him additional strength to face the cards to come. The next card the Fool will meet is Death, and, like the other cards in the major arcana, all is not as it first appears. So, join us as we take the next step on a walk through the tarot.